So, Ed, welcome back to the Bard's Archive. We're going to talk about, you guessed it, more Mesoamerica stuff. And today, let's focus specifically. I mean, who knows? Maybe we could branch out into other things, but at least let's start with some construction stuff. Um,
Sounds good to me.
so, yeah. So, unlike those amateurs over in this country called Egypt that only built 144 pyramids, the Mayans in South America built like 1,000.
Oh, that's a very low number. I
That's a
would
low
put it in,
number.
I would put it in thousands.
Thousands. Okay. What can you recall off the top of your head a number or a range?
Well, no one knows. I mean, in Egypt, we're fairly certain we haven't missed any pyramids. In Central America, this huge rainforest covers most of it, and it's a hilly place. So, I mean, there are definitely thousands left to be discovered. So, it would be a neat project for somebody to try to number how many are currently known. I think the sticky part of that would be then you'd have to really define what's a pyramid,
Okay.
which
Okay.
that's a tricky one, is it that it's that shape, or is it that it's a certain size? Like if you just had a little guy like a pyramid in your yard that was like a meter tall, is that a pyramid? If it's not, is a 10-meter one a pyramid? Does it have to be a certain size? So, if you counted anything of that shape, well, shit, now we're talking about tens of thousands.
Okay.
So, we need some criteria upon which we decide this is a pyramid, both in shape and defined by our categories of, it's a religious structure, or it's big enough to have a building on top, or I don't know. That criteria isn't really defined.
Okay. Okay. So, interesting. But that is pretty interesting, though, that it still fully isn't even uncovered. The ancient world of the various amounts of people that have lived in South America still isn't fully excavated. I
Oh,
remember.
not by a long shot.
Mhm.
I've popped off on a number of shows. I'll say it here too. I believe that we've actually archaeologically investigated less than 1% of the Maya world when it actually comes to like boots on the ground and looking at it. And, you know, maybe I could even include mapping. Maybe if we said mapping, we'd be above 1%.
Mhm.
But geez, like take the site that I worked for 3 years, for example, Palenque. I mapped there 1,481 structures and a whole lot of terraces, kilometers and kilometers of terraces holding it to a hillside. To this day, we have excavated in any form, even just little test pits, about 33 of those buildings.
Okay.
So 1,481 versus 33 in 100 years. Like even a well-known site like Palenque, we've barely even begun to dig
It's like the John Paul Jones line, I have only begun to dig.
it.
Um,
That should be our mantra.
we have only begun to dig. Um, that just made me think of like those old, like 1950s, like cigarette cart kind of salesmen. Come get your whatever it is. Maybe archaeologists could like have like rentable digging buckets at some of these sites, and then the public can help.
No, no, that's strictly against the rules. We already employ totally untrained students to let the general public come in would be a trouble. Not to be an exclusionist, I'm not an ivory tower like that's only for trained people, but it is an important fact of archaeology that it is not a repeatable experiment. If we allow people to just willy-nilly dig, we could destroy important clues that tell us things. And, we've got to document everything because everything we dig is now destroyed, and the document we wrote about it is all that humanity gets going forward.
Okay, yeah. Because I remember that not that long ago, which I will try and remember to bring up some of these pictures. I took a little trip over across the sea to this country called Britain. I don't know if you've ever heard of it or not.
Oh, I've been there a few times. Nice place.
Yeah, so nice place, nice people. And at Stonehenge, this is my first time going over there. The archaeologists working there said how much science has changed in the digging field. There's even some places now, like it used to just be, dig and or dig around, and now you don't even dig for some places, and still able to extract so much information from that spot.
Remote sensing has definitely changed the game. A good LiDAR image can tell us so much more than an excavation can. And I'm absolutely in favor of that for the reasons I just explained. The term I use is non-invasive archaeology. The more we can learn without ever putting a shovel in the ground, the better, because then that evidence remains for the future generations. I'm a Star Trek nerd. I hope someday we'll be able to do archaeology remotely from a spaceship on another planet. Like, Captain Picard, his side job is archaeologist. And they do. I love the episodes where he's doing archaeology on his time off.
That is, man, I completely forgot about that. I'll have to go back and watch that over again when
Oh
you
man, the
talk about
archaeology episodes and his like bad news girlfriend Vosh, great stuff.
awesome. Actually, I'll branch off again. With LiDAR, actually, I remember somewhere around 10 years ago, at least this was introduced to the public with Dr. Albert Lin on his LiDAR TV show there. He
That National
found,
Geo one, yeah, that was
yeah,
nice.
yeah, really lovely show he has. He found like a whole nother city in a farther away region. It was just started off as one structure, and then the scan, and then like he did the scan, and the whole computer magic happened, and then boom, can see a whole other city. Um, and so in the archaeological world, are you guys finding this more and more in Mesoamerica? Like there's so much more for cities and places built.
Well, we have not really gotten to the point where people are using LiDAR to find completely unknown cities. If I recall that episode of that Nat Geo show right, it was on the outskirts of a known city already, and they discovered a big new section. I think he did that with my buddy Edwin Roman. He's great. He's a Guatemalan archaeologist down there, and I think those two were looking for a section of the site, and then went out there and ground truthed it as well. That was exciting stuff. But I think it's because LiDAR is proprietary at the moment and very expensive. Not so much to get the data, but to process the data, because the software that's used is proprietary. You can't just do it on your own computer. You've got to send it to the folks and they bill you. And so we have not gotten to the point where it's the price point where we can use LiDAR to just scan the entire jungle. And there's also different levels of LiDAR. There's more intense, like more accurate and less accurate, depending on how high the flight was up and the resolution of the camera, I think. So like there's free stuff that's out there from governments and sometimes like oil companies and things will share that data with archaeologists that they've already paid for their own uses. But it's at the moment even the stuff that was there in Nat Geo, that stuff was targeted on sites that we already knew about, and then the periphery where we found more and found more detail within the city itself. So not yet, but it's definitely capable of that. And when the money guys finally give up the ghost and it becomes open software, I think the dam's going to break.
Awesome. Well, hopefully that day comes soon enough. Um, I have to
They were
say,
supposed to do it last year, but I don't know where they're at with that.
okay. Well, hopefully that comes sooner than later. I mean,
It's a proprietary software. The moment that they're forced to make it open source code, bam, everybody into business making their processing their own data.
nice, nice. Yeah, and guys like you, there's going to be a lot more cool information to learn about. So, particularly the Mayans. I don't know how the other. I don't know who else was quite the builders of ancient Mesoamerica, but how much do we really know about ancient Mesoamerican building, construction, architecture planning?
That we know a good bit about. Like that last little part you said, architectural planning, that's something I wish we'd know more about. I'd love to find like blueprints or models or things like that. That is very rare that we actually find the planning phases of the stuff. But as we, pull the buildings apart to find the inner layers and then ultimately reconstruct them, we learn a whole lot about what they're doing. So we have good data on the different ways in which the way they use stone, the way they quarried it, the way the engineering that went into the buildings.
Okay.
I think an underappreciated right off the bat thing that they spent a lot of time managing was rain and water. They had to build to that environment, and it's a rainforest, so they expected rain to hit constantly, and they had a lot of water management features in their architecture. Simple stuff like we use gutters. They would use the cornices of roofs to move water so it wouldn't just destroy the floor underneath it. Things like that you can see in the minute details all the time.
What were some of the other environmental factors that they would build for? Because I think you were talking once about in Mox Na, the jungle, like within a couple of days, could just regrow. So if you just cut a fresh path, um,
Yep.
in like 2 days, it would be overgrown and you could easily get lost.
Well, certainly the jungle has taken over all these buildings. That's why we find them in ruins. The Maya fastidiously kept weeding things and repaving. When we their floor levels, the sides of the buildings, they use a ton of stucco. After they make it out of stone, then they'll make a veneer of stucco and paint that so it looks like a nice, pretty solid wall. The Maya style was to always cover those bricks. So you never saw the bricks. You saw the stucco on the outside. But when researchers take fragments of that stucco and put them under a microscope, we can see that they did refurbishing layers again and again and again, almost seasonally. Some, older buildings will show 30 different levels that they repainted the surface of the stucco so that it wouldn't get moldy and the trees wouldn't grow and split it apart. So there was a lot of everyday maintenance that the Maya did to keep their buildings looking beautiful.
Okay. Yeah, yeah. I mean, that's pretty genius.
One thing about it that's different, I think when all of us think about the scale of ancient buildings and how hard it was or easy to build that building, we think of the famous Egyptian example where each one of the blocks of the pyramids are multi-ton, and they were quarried somewhere kilometers and kilometers away and perhaps floated down the Nile by part, but then they had to at some point be dragged across a segment of desert and then up onto the building. Those are all just mind-boggling things. But when it comes to the Maya, especially the classic period, the the work that was involved to make these buildings was honestly way less. And that nobody wants to hear that. You want to hear that it's something, mind-boggling, but actually they were a very practical people who were masters of the natural resources of their area. And so in the pre-classic period, we'd find megalithic stones in buildings. But in the classic period, generally speaking, an average block for any of the classic period cities was really probably about this big. It was something that, a man could pick up. A strong man could pick up two or three of them. And so they'd be quarried in those pieces in a nearby quarry. Most of the Maya area sits on limestone bedrock, and the buildings are built out of that same limestone. So, if you were starting as an engineer from square one and you got a chunk of jungle that's over bedrock, you cut down the jungle and you flatten out the bedrock, there's where you get most of your initial stone. If you're digging a quarry or if you're digging a reservoir, you dig down a quarry, it turns into a reservoir and you've got all that stone. So the stone oftentimes, except for the monuments, which sometimes they'd pick special harder stone, the stuff in the buildings, it's all from like right there. And they're not big rocks, so men can just carry them in tump lines or in their hands the short distance to the construction site. It's a very wet place, so you don't need to worry about water for your mortar and the various things. That there's a surprising amount of water needed for a good construction project. But it was always right there too. I mean, rainwater fall all the time. They could collect it if they weren't next to a river. And then, it's same thing with the stucco. You had to burn trees really hard, but it's really just limestone that's just burnt to a crisp. And then you put water in that. Once you burn limestone down to a powder, it becomes it's like ash and limestone. And when you pour water on that, it makes this weird exothermic reaction. I've done it myself a number of times to create stucco. It bubbles, it gets really hot, and then it turns into this stucco paste. And you can keep it sometimes if somebody wants really nice stucco, they'll let it just sit for 6 months and it'll become kind of a more intense stucco. But you can use it right then and slap it on a wall or on a floor. So all the stuff they had was right there. I When I was working in Copan in the 90s, there was a woman named Chris Corelli who was a graduate student there, and she wanted to ask this question of how long would it take to build one of the pyramids of Copan? I'll pick Pyramid 16. It's of a good size. Now, she hired like 10 guys from town and just had them do things and timed them. Like 1 week, she'd have them just hauling blocks all day long. So these poor 10 guys would just be starting like 300 yards away and hauling blocks up to the front of the pyramid, and she'd time them. And then sometimes she'd have them go down to the river all day and drag buckets of water up. And it was funny, by afternoon they were just dragging ass. They could barely even get up the stairs anymore. But she timed it all out, and her conclusion was that a crew of 50 to max 100 men working 4 to 6 months could build the entire pyramid.
Wow, that's
That was really
remarkable.
short.
That is, but that is really remarkable as to how resourceful and how good they were with their resources.
Masters of the recycle program.
Yeah, master recyclers.
They did use it. They still to this day, like, the idea of a goodwill or a Salvation Army in the Maya world, unheard of. Nobody nobody gives away used stuff. You use it down to a nub.
What kind of so I'm curious with stucco, did they have do we know like if there were people hired as like specialized, like you're the official stucco maker, you're the official blocksmith. Um,
Yeah, we do. Well, I mean, we don't have written records saying, it was Joe the stucco maker, but we have in a couple of different Maya cities, we've identified places that are stucco kilns. And we can see that there's specialized, areas that would have multiple of these kilns. So you would assume there's a whole crew working them, or there'd just be one. And it at scale where you'd think those people were, those were the guys that were employed as that. I think it was probably like an analogy from modern times is, a dude works construction and he won't work his whole life being the guy that pours the cement. Maybe he'll, move on to wiring or plumbing or something like that. So I don't think there was kind of like a caste system where, some poor schmo was born a stucco boy and that's all he'll ever be. But I do think that they had organized work crews where there were guys at the quarry bringing stone in. There were guys at the site cutting down hard trees to they have to make a really hot fire to create stucco, to burn. Basically, it's got to be hot enough to burn limestone into powder.
okay, okay. And so you talked about cement. Um, now, in the ancient Roman world, it was recently discovered that they were mixing a type of calcium. They had a special
Oh, I
process.
saw that report that was like self-healing.
Yeah, it's like borderline self-regenerating, the
So cool.
indestructible.
So totally cool.
Yeah. So do we know what kind of like because you were talking about paving, what was done in Mesoamerica, if there's a process like that that they would do?
I think we still have work to do on that subject, but at the moment, the common wisdom or just studies, there is no Maya cement. I think actually a friend of mine is always correcting me. We're supposed to say concrete at this moment, not cement. The finished product is concrete.
Finished product.
Um,
Great.
there's one site in all of Mesoamerica where they think they've found actual concrete, and that's El Tajín, which is outside of the Maya area. It's in northern Mexico. And they say that they found like a second story of a building where it was a concrete slab. I've never really looked into the why of that, but that was a respected study. But in the Maya world, we have this stucco. So you'd think, I mean, that's part of the process of making cement and then concrete. But we only have this stuff, like there's a subtle difference between mortar and concrete. And they are similar substances. Concrete just has more. And so we've never found them making concrete, but they were capable of it. So one of these days we may discover that we're looking at stuff wrong.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, I don't know why well, I know why this is coming to mind, but in a more recent time period, um I found, speaking of mass recycling, I interviewed someone from the House of Seven Gables in Salem, and they talked about in the 1600s, in the colonial period, they would make, I don't want to say glue, but some sticking substances. They'd grind up ceramics and whatnot. Were there other things aside from cement that these people were making in construction to help keep things together, to help build things?
The stucco was a big, or there mortar was also made of basically the same substance as the stucco, but it was trapped inside the wall, so it wouldn't degrade as quickly because it was sealed inside. But it was really just not even our modern mortar, so it would come apart. At the site I was working at Palenque, the buildings there are holding up so much better because they did something to their normally stucco mortar that made it stronger. I bet it was something like some kind of tree sap or something, but it's stronger. Nobody's ever tested it. I'm always whining to my more chemistry oriented colleagues that they should get a sample and figure out how the heck they made a stronger mortar at Palenque that none of the rest of the Maya world did. But there's hints there. That's part of, the we need more studies. There's a modern thing that I've seen, which is really a trip, and I don't know whether the ancient Maya did it at all, but it would seem weird if modern Maya invented it. It's basically it's weird. I've only seen it in the Yucatan, but in the jungle all over there are these leaf cutter ants. Everybody's seen them on those, Nat Geo shows, Animal Planet, where they build these giant mounds and they make these long trails going to specific trees that they want, and they all cut the leaves there and then they bring them into the mound and they masticate them, and they're kind of a fertilizer for tiny little mushroom farms they have inside the mounds. The mounds are a real trip. They're big platforms. They can stand. I've seen ones as tall as I am. But they flatten out the top and they put little mounds on top. It kind of looks like a little mini Maya city. But okay, I'm digressing there. What the modern Maya do is they take abandoned leafcutter mounds that are this really interesting red brown thick kind of clay by the time they're done with it and abandon the mound. So they'll take specifically that leafcutter mud and they'll spread it out on they want to make a floor, like a cement floor. So they'll bring a bunch of that dirt in and spread it mostly out like it's going to be the floor, and then they pour honey on it, bee honey. And those two substances, again, make this weird exothermic reaction. They bubble and get really super hot. And they've got about 5 minutes to spread it out like cement. And pow, it sets as a concrete like floor. And it's leaf cutter mud and honey. And they make a floor as strong as cement or concrete. So really, it's just such a trip, and I've never seen it in an excavation. And since it's so organic and not stone based at all, that's probably why it probably just any floor like that would have eroded in the jungle centuries ago. But it'll definitely last a generation or two. The exothermic reaction is what gets me though. That how did they figure out that only that kind of mud? Because you can pour, honey in the dirt. It's not gonna, it's not gonna bubble up. It's the, it's this masticated by leafcutter ants mud that probably put all sorts of acids, enzymes into the mud that makes it have that exothermic reaction with honey and then harden like a rock.
Yeah, that would
And
make,
they figured that out. That's freaking smart.
yeah, that is the ancient people have like the craziest ability to toy around to study stuff like that and figure out how to use it.
What's just to add to that topic, I didn't learn that from ancient people. I saw that and learned that from super humble guys living in thatch huts in the woods. So, like, yes, it might have been invented by amazing ancient people, but the ingenuity is still right there with people that we think are, in our terms, just outrageously humble, like uneducated, the ignorant peasant, but they've got some tricks up their sleeve.
Yeah. Well, actually, I would say peasant is more of a compliment because these are people that can grow their own food, make their own food, preserve their own food, create their own home, create their own clothes, create their own tools, and live in extraordinarily difficult times and manage to survive and thrive.
Well said.
Yeah. So there's a lot to be learned from peasants. Maybe to wrap this all up, tools in the construction of all of this, amazing stuff being built. Um, so you talked about once finding like obsidian tools made of obsidian glass, and they still remain sharp enough to cut your hand. Were those the only tools used in the construction of these that we know of?
No, no, there was a variety of things used. Obsidian is kind of the everyday sharp tool. So if you want to incise something, probably they used it in the final carvings. They used obsidian a lot and they'd carve into the limestone. But to pull the limestone out of the beds, the most common tool in the Maya world is made of chert, which is flint. It's silicate, but it's everywhere there. In fact, I could say, all of the Americas, the most common tool is made of chert. It's a very, very common uh, stone type. You can find it everywhere. Obsidian only shows up around volcanic areas. So you got to import a lot of that. The everyday guy could just go dig a hole in his backyard in Tikal and get some chert, and he could nap that down into we get a lot of uh what we call axes, and they're like, they're about this big, and some of them we can tell from you put them under a microscope and you can tell what they've been used for. Some of them are like when they're super shiny and polished, those are probably farming implements. But if they've got a lot of like abrasive like divots in them in the microscope, that means that they were used in a quarry or they were used on other stone. And so we see a lot of those. We know that in these limestone quarries, they would take this harder chert, which actually grows in limestone, uh, and they'd chop out the blocks like that.
Okay.
So that's a big the chert axe is probably the Swiss Army knife of the Maya.
The Swiss Army knife. That's pretty neat. That's
There's
pretty
also,
neat.
it's I think it would surprise people that like don't do a lot of camping or anything, but you can take a hard wood and then burn it in the fire, kind of burn its top, its surface, and you can make a very, very strong digging implement. I've seen Maya in modern times, instead of using chert or metal tools, they'll just use fire hardened sticks and they'll chop a line into the limestone and a line over here, and then they'll break it off. But they can, the hardwoods down there getting even harder with fire treatment, they they can dig through stone.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I can see that now. You're talking about in like the classic period, they'd cut these specifically big blocks. That's pretty unique. That's pretty unique. And all right, I will leave it there. Not to hold you up further, Ed. Thank you again for coming back and talking about construction once again.
My pleasure. You're a good guy. I hope your channel's going well, and thanks for inviting me.
Thank you.